A viewer asked, how do you feel about traps? Traps? You don't detect any traps. The corridor appears completely safe. I have to say, I don't use traps all that often. I certainly never use old school Tomb of Horrors style bullshit instant death traps, with or without warning. Tomb of Horrors tends to be in the without warning category. That said, there are plenty of good ways to use traps. For one thing, if you are using miniatures on a grid for encounters, having some of the squares be trapped can make for an interesting combat. Once they learn that there are traps, the heroes might have to choose between charging the ranged enemies and risking a nasty surprise, or getting bottled in. Maybe if they watch the melee enemies, they will learn safe paths through the minefield, or spot a couple squares the enemy are avoiding. The trick is that the number one thing that makes traps interesting and fair, rather than completely random and asinine, is hinting at their presence. This can be as blunt as an NPC warning that the dungeon they are looking for is a trap-filled labyrinth, or a suspect skeleton lying in an otherwise empty, safe-looking corridor. One of the easiest ways to foreshadow a trapped area is probably just to position a weak trap without warning, that, being without warning, is probably unavoidable but is relatively harmless, serving only to make them think about the possibility of more serious traps up ahead. Ever see a 10-foot deep non-spiked pit trap? This is usually the purpose. Or the other old standby, a very lethal trap, which is obvious because somebody else has already triggered it. Of course, the best way is by far the hardest to do on a consistent basis, but the ideal is to work something subtle into your description that could potentially give warning of the specific trap present, but without being obvious. As you can imagine, that balance is so difficult as to be unrealistic most of the time, which is why the preceding methods of warning make the most sense in practice. In any case, once the party knows or suspects that there are traps around, then it's up to them to take precautions, and if they don't, being forced to make a save against some bad stuff seems fair enough. Another thing you should keep in mind is the party's game rules-based trap finding and disarming capability. In most editions of D&D, you need an actual rogue, or similar, in the party to deal with traps, which is problematic, because that tends to turn traps into a minigame for only one player, while that character tends to be weaker in most other situations to compensate for this rare skill. It's not even a good minigame, since if you just purely go off the search and disarm skills, it's mostly random, with few actual choices once they are aware of the threat. And what if they don't have a rogue type? In that case, you don't want to use many, or perhaps any, traps which cannot be avoided or disarmed in ways other than the skill checks. But if they do have a rogue, you actually want to include traps more often so they don't feel like one of their defining class abilities is useless. None of these scenarios sound like especially good storytelling or gameplay. To me, the best traps are all about choice. What is entertaining or epic about blundering into a section of hall that was more or less unavoidable and taking more or less unavoidable damage from it? Oh, darn, I guess it was trapped. But imagine a passageway whose walls are covered by curved grooves of different thicknesses, some a quarter inch, some a half inch, others a full inch wide, all representing the movement of the stars in this hemisphere. Whether they guessed that the thick ones could hide nasty blades, whether they examined the paths to realize they could duck and crawl to avoid all of the thick grooves, only the penitent man shall pass, or whether they cast light on a coin, flick it into a slot from a safe angle, and look for reflections, or sudden blade attacks, or even if they don't think about such dangers, walk in and have to make a reflex saves to avoid some close shaves, even if they get hit, they will feel like, if they had been really clever, they could have seen this coming. And then it becomes more of an action scene, or a funny story, rather than a game master popping out and shouting, "Gotcha, sucker!" Now, imagine they are chasing a fleeing assassin, following him into the mansion's trophy room only to find him gone. They know from the blood trail that he came this way. There must be some kind of secret passage. But there are so many objects, statuettes, suits of armor, weapons, and trophies from magical beasts. The now dead hunter had bragged earlier in the night about his many sentimental treasures and the traps that guard them. Might something else he had mentioned be a hint as to which item is a secret lever and which ones are trapped? Can they rule out some possibilities with their other skills? Maybe find the edges of the secret door so they can focus their search within arm's reach? And here's a weird idea. If something about an area you've described makes them nervous, makes the party start looking for traps, even though you didn't put any there, ask yourself, are they right to be worried? Is the area that suspicious looking? Would a trap here make sense from the villain's or the builder's point of view? If the answer is yes, then maybe you should put a trap there. Behind the scenes, just make something up on the spot, even if they are likely to find and disarm it easily. They are helping you tell a good story, and you are helping them feel empowered. Everybody wins, right? In summary, used properly, traps can turn an environment from just being some descriptive text into a source of potential danger and tension. Being hit with a trap will itself probably never be fun, but if they are done responsibly, their consequences not ridiculously punishing, and the players feel like their own action triggered it, like it was the result of a choice they made, then the traps can make things interesting and can provide a powerful sense of relief when they nervously touch that book or open that door and nothing bad happens. If you have a question about running an RPG campaign or anything else, you can ask it in the comments or tweet it to #RPGQA. I'm not really an expert, but if people keep asking, I may just take a stab at it. And check out the drama, humor, and ongoing illustrated story of Tales from My D&D Campaign.
Please click the like button, though there may be a small chance of lycanthropy. Just make sure the only animals around are good ones. You don't want to become like a were-toad or were-gerbil or something.